this is Sean. Happy Chinese New Year and welcome back to Ethos English, the podcast for advanced English learners and the people who teach them. Here's some information for those of you new to the podcast. You'll find a full text version of the show, including links to all of the readings I mentioned in the show notes at ethosenglish.com/podcast. As I go along, I explain vocabulary you might have trouble with. At the end of the episode, I go over each item with a full definition and an example. I send out a monthly newsletter with a Quizlet flashcard set to help you memorize the vocabulary covered in each episode. All you have to do is go to the show notes at ethosenglish.com/podcast and you'll be prompted to sign up. Rating me and giving me a written review, especially on Apple Podcasts, is a wonderful way to show your appreciation of the podcast. Unless, of course, you hate it, in which case, don't bother. Also, if you're interested in more content, feel free to follow me on Instagram at Ethos English with Sean. Now, on with the show. Although the World Cup recently held in Qatar already feels like a distant memory for many of us, there are still some major corruption scandals being looked into in Europe directly linked to this high-profile sporting event. Last month, the European Parliament Vice President Eva Kaila was arrested and charged with corruption related to Qatar's campaign to bribe officials. Interestingly, Kaila had met with the Qatari Minister of Labour and upon her return to Brussels praised the country as a, quote, front-runner in labour rights in front of the European Parliament. Police then found huge sums of cash in her apartment that she was unable to account for. Coincidence? I think not. Unsurprisingly, Kaila and Qatar have denied any wrongdoing. That is, they insist they are innocent. Now, in the wake of this scandal, the European Parliament has announced measures to combat corruption by offering greater protections to whistleblowers. That is, those who work for an organization who tell the authorities that people in that organization are doing something illegal, dishonest, or wrong. In a Radio Free Europe article, the author states the following: Brussels has always been something of a lobbyist's paradise, with thousands of politicians, officials, and diplomats in the same place with very lenient rules. There's some interesting language here. Brussels has always been something of a lobbyist's paradise. This chunk, something of a, is used to describe a person or thing in a way that is partly true but not completely or exactly. So we could say that Brussels is something of a lobbyist's paradise is a more formal way of saying that Brussels is kind of a lobbyist's paradise. It's a way to make a statement more tentative, that is, less aggressive. Another useful word from this short quotation is lenient. Brussels' rules around lobbyists are very lenient. That is, not very strict, or not as strict as we would expect or hope. Now, part of the reason I was keen on discussing this news story this week is because it has been dubbed, that is, named Qatargate. And here the suffix, or ending, gate, basically refers to a political scandal. And it's quite common in the media to hear about different scandals referred to as something gate. Another recent example was the so-called Partygate incident during the beginning of the COVID lockdown in the UK. The then Prime Minister Boris Johnson, along with other elected officials, including the current Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, were found to have attended parties when such gatherings were illegal. So, where does this tradition of naming political scandals with the suffix gate come from? In the early 1970s, the then US President Richard Nixon, a Republican, was found to have been involved in authorizing the burglary of the Democratic Party's headquarters at the Watergate building in Washington, D.C. What's more, Nixon was involved in his party spying on the Democrats. This eventually was revealed in the media, and Nixon resigned in August of 1974. It's worth pointing out that he's the only US president to ever resign. This original scandal was referred to as Watergate in reference to the name of the building where the Democratic Party's headquarters were located. And since then, journalists around the world have used the ending gate for all sorts of scandals, and the suffix has even spread to other languages, including Chinese. If you're interested, you can check out the Wikipedia entry on this, which I've linked in the show notes. In this entry, there's an interesting quotation from the sociologist John Thompson, who criticized the media's obsession with scandals, which he called scandal syndrome. He wrote the following on scandal syndrome. A self-reproducing and self-reinforcing process driven on by competitive and combative struggles in the media and political fields, and giving rise to more and more scandals which increasingly become the focus of mediated forms of public debate, marginalizing or displacing other issues and producing on occasion a climate of political crisis which can debilitate or even paralyze a government. I think this is an interesting reflection. In the case of Qatargate, is the media coverage of the misdeeds of some of the members of the European Parliament going to do more harm than good? Is it going to contribute to voter apathy? What do you think? Now, let's go over this week's vocabulary. Bribe. Illegally give someone, especially a public official, money or a gift in order to persuade them to do something for you. The noun form, that is, the phenomenon of bribing someone, is bribery. The only way we could get into the country was by bribing the border officials. Account for. Give a satisfactory explanation of why something has happened or why you did something. Synonym, explain. Can you account for your movements on that night? I think not. Formal. Used to say that you strongly believe something is not true or that you disagree with someone. This could be a coincidence, but I think not. Deny wrongdoing, or deny any wrongdoing. States that you are not guilty of something wrong or illegal, often used with any for emphasis. Deny any wrongdoing. Mr. Pasqua has repeatedly denied any wrongdoing and says he has never met Mr. Falcone. In the wake of. If something happens in the wake of an event, it happens afterwards and usually as a result of it. Famine followed in the wake of the drought. Whistleblower. Someone working for an organization who tells the authorities that people in the organization are doing something illegal, dishonest, or wrong. The company had paid out substantial sums to silence would-be whistleblowers. Something of a. Used to describe a person or thing in a way that is partly true but not completely or exactly. The news came as something of a surprise. Lenient. Not strict in the way you punish someone or in the standard you expect. School examiners say that marking has become more lenient in recent years. Dub. Give something or someone a name that describes them in some way. The body, thousands of years old, was found in the Alps and dubbed the Iceman. Burglary, the crime of getting into a building to steal things. Police are investigating a spate of burglaries in the Kingsland Road area. Misdeed, formal, an act that is criminal or wrong. She's been making up for her past misdeeds by doing a lot of voluntary work. Thanks for listening. See you again next week.